On April 8, 2014, at around 6 p.m., Jim Hellwig, better known as the Ultimate Warrior, sadly passed away from a heart attack at the age of 54. Warrior left behind his wife Dana and their 2 daughters, who were present when Warrior accepted his place in the WWE Hall of Fame just 3 days prior. Warrior's induction was one of the unlikeliest of all time, thanks in part to his feuds with Vince McMahon and his poor reputation among his peers. Warrior was said to have had a recent change of heart prior to his return to the WWE, as he made amends with wrestlers like Hulk Hogan and Jake Roberts, while also correcting his legacy within WWE by participating in documentaries and the WWE 2K14 video game. Warrior passed away just 1 day after making an appearance on the Raw after Mania while cutting an eerie promo. It had been his first appearance on WWE TV in over 17 years, which makes the whole situation something of a fairy tale. A man who had been largely separated from the wrestling world, even going out of his way to bash several people within it. He then comes back home and makes up with Vince and several other peers, has this amazing moment with his family, and then cuts a promo on Raw in front of millions of people, then dies the next day. Ever since his death, WWE has been working double time to honor the Ultimate Warrior's legacy. This has been evident by the Warrior Award, which has become a staple of the WWE's Hall of Fame ceremonies. In a way, it is nice to see WWE honor his legacy. However, it would be a disservice not to discuss the very real complexities that come with a man like Jim Hellwig. Hellwig is one of the most memorable characters from a bygone era of WWE, and his actions outside of the ring would have no doubt been his defining legacy had he not put the work in to fix it prior to his death. Today, I attempt to unpackage all that encompasses the character of the Ultimate Warrior, while detailing the reality of Jim Hellwig's larger-than-life personality. Without further ado, I present to you the complex legacy of the Ultimate Warrior. Ultimate Warrior exploded onto the scene in WWF during the mid-80s after a run in southern territories like the UWF and World Class Championship Wrestling. He formed a tag team with Sting, and they became known as the Blade Runners. This run was short-lived as Warrior had the bodybuilding physique that wowed the infamous promoter from Hartford, Connecticut, Vince McMahon. McMahon quickly signed Warrior and pushed him to the moon by choosing him to be the one to end Honky Tonk Man's record Intercontinental Championship reign. The win was a decisive 27-second squash match that took place on the very first edition of a show called SummerSlam. Soon enough, Warrior was in main events and eventually dethroned Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6 in a title-for-title match. The match was also a rare babyface versus babyface match. Arguably, the match could be credited with causing a huge rift in the Hogan-McMahon relationship, as McMahon was ready to crown a new star to take Hogan's place. Warrior definitely let the star power get to his head when he negotiated a contract that stated he would have his own locker room and travel in his own limo to and from the airport and the arena. This, along with many other factors, made Warrior extremely unpopular with his peers. As a matter of fact, I don't think there is a more unpopular wrestler in shoot interviews than Warrior, as very few have had good things to say about him when they are asked. Most people are respectful when speaking of someone that has passed on, but they just can't deny what kind of a person he was. Ultimate Warrior won the WWF title in April of 1990 and carried the belt for about 9 months before dropping the title in a questionable fashion to Sergeant Slaughter. This was done so the Hulkster could squash the evil Slaughter in front of 16,000 people in LA after WWE failed to sell out the 100,000 seat arena for WrestleMania 7. A further breakdown of this story can be found on my channel. Warrior's lack of popularity within the locker room and disappointing drawing ability in comparison to Hogan led Vince McMahon to renege on Warrior as the top star. This led to Warrior becoming frustrated with Vince as he held up McMahon for more money and even more outrageous demands, to which McMahon agreed upon, only to fire Warrior right after. Warrior would return a few months later at WrestleMania 8, but would then find his way out of the company shortly thereafter. His leaving was a result of the steroids trial, and since Warrior was an admitted steroid user, WWF let him go in an effort to clean up their image of steroided out, larger-than-life wrestlers. In all, Warrior had roughly a 5-year run at the very top of sports entertainment. Though it was short, his run was one of the most significant, and he touched millions of fans who grew up watching wrestling during his prime. Fans grew to love his entrance that saw him running to the ring like he had just drank 12 cups of coffee. Combined with his intense theme music and colorful attire, it was easy to see why fans fell in love with him. Aside from alienating himself from the locker room, he was also unsafe to work with in the ring, according to several wrestlers. During an interview, Brutus Beefcake flat out said he couldn't work in the ring. And Psycho Sid claims that working with Warrior made him quit the WWF after Warrior went into business for himself during a match. Jake Roberts also stated that he had to ask Warrior for permission to wrestle him for the WWF title. He was often described as an egotistical man who let the fame get to his head. This was evident during the Dark Side of the Ring episode made about him, where his ex-wife stated that he had a woman in every city that he traveled to. Warrior was living a rock star life and looked out for himself and himself only in a business that generally frowns upon that mentality. He was not a wrestler by trade and was not a fan of it growing up, and simply looked at it as a way of making a living. He wasn't interested in doing the coolest moves or sticking up for the other wrestlers in the locker room. As I said earlier, he was a one-of-a-kind superstar, a superstar that left behind an incredible legacy in the ring and on camera from a character standpoint. Behind the scenes, the real-life person behind the face paint and tribal cries is where things get complex. When Warrior returned to the WWF in 1996 for a brief stint, he began to show his uglier side to a small degree. In 1996, Triple H wasn't the Triple H that we know and love yet. He was an up-and-comer on the way to becoming an icon. At this point in time, Triple H was a safe and trusted in-ring technician that was tasked with the unenviable task of making the Warrior look good upon his return. As the story goes, Triple H asked Warrior what he wanted to do for the match, only to be greeted with the response of something like, "I'm gonna kick out of your finish and then beat you in less than 2 minutes and then hit the showers." Vince and the WWF were in a really bad place in early 1996. WCW was beginning to pick up steam after the launch of its new show Nitro. The WWF's business was at a record low, so to counter this, Vince brought back Warrior with hopes he'd rekindle some of the magic from years prior and assist WWF in getting back to where it wanted to be. Warrior had all the leverage here, and he knew that, which meant WWE had purchased what felt like millions of these Warrior comics that he was trying to sell, which all ended up in the trash, on top of other ridiculousness that came with him. Warrior used that leverage to squash a rising star, but not just squash him. He literally no-sold the pedigree in what is now a moment that WWE tries to pretend didn't happen. Vince was all okay with this because he didn't want to upset the Warrior and thought maybe he'd catch on as a star again. Of course, this all went to hell when a few months into this return, after the orchestrated burial of Triple H, Warrior no-showed house show events, resulting in him being fired yet again for the third and final time by McMahon. What makes this firing controversial is that Warrior claimed to have missed the shows due to his father's passing from a heart attack, a claim that several who were with WWE at the time have questioned, since Warrior allegedly hated his father and had no relationship with him. If he did indeed lie about his father's death being the reason for no-showing events, that is pretty low. This is all speculative, as I have no clue what really happened, so do with that information as you will. After his final run with the WWE, Warrior had a cup of coffee with WCW and was literally just brought in so Hulk Hogan could get his win back, as Kevin Sullivan put it. According to Sullivan, Hulk hated that he had to do the job for Warrior and felt he was subpar to Hulk. Then things got real trifling with concerns to Warrior as we rolled into the new millennium. He embarked on a public speaking career to coincide with trying his hands as an ultra-conservative commentator. It was then that we as wrestling fans learned a lot about who the human being Jim Hellwig was. He also had a blog called Warrior's Machete, where he'd post about his past in wrestling, current celebrities at the time, and so much more. Notoriously, he posted controversial political and social views there as well. I'm not going to read word for word what he shared on the blog. You could read the excerpts if you'd like. They can be found in an article published by Vice News, which I'll link in the description of this video. Warrior made some comments about homosexuality that most would perceive as hate-filled, as well as some racially insensitive comments about the victims of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. A distasteful piece about Heath Ledger is also in the archives of his blog somewhere, where Warrior spoke about Ledger's daughter being freed from a bad influence and that Ledger, quote, did what he had to do to kill himself. Arguably the worst of all his blog posts were about the late great Bobby Heenan regarding his diagnosis of cancer. I say this is the worst because WWE paired the Warrior Award with the Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer Foundation for many years. Literally, we'd see John Cena dancing with cancer survivors who were wearing Warrior-themed gear. Warrior went on to trash Heenan and was essentially happy that he got what he deserved when he got cancer of the throat and lost his voice. To top it all off, Bobby Heenan's death from the cancer happened at around the same time the Susan G. Komen and Warrior Award brands were merged. While Warrior is no doubt one of the most memorable and iconic legends of WWE's storied history, his real-life complexities cannot be overlooked, as much as WWE has tried to erase them from our memories with their shameless marketing of the Warrior since his passing. My only wonder is, why the Ultimate Warrior? Why is he the face of such a beautiful award that recognizes real-life heroes who are fighting cancer like Conor the Crusher, or Shad Gaspard, who gave his life to save his child's life? Someone like John Cena, whose mantra is never give up, and has a squeaky clean track record from a personal and scandal standpoint, just makes too much sense to have an award like Warrior's named after him. Cena was around for far longer than Warrior, is way more beloved backstage, and is a Mount Rushmore guy to top it all off. That's just my 2 cents. Either way, there are people who will always love the Ultimate Warrior, and at its core, that's what the Warrior Award is about, a character. Given that WWE erased Hulk Hogan for comments made in his personal life during a sex tape that should have never been released to begin with, it is surprising that WWE chooses to honor Warrior the way they do when his insensitive remarks will live on the internet forever. The Ultimate Warrior character was one of the most captivating characters ever, and he rightfully has a spot in our minds as one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, no matter the complexities that are tied to his name. And with that being said, I'd like to thank you all for watching another edition of Wrestling Uncovered, and I will talk to you on the next one. Have a great day. Peace.